In the silence of the vastness, a betrayal reveals that not all wild forces are enemies. Sometimes they're the only hope left. The office atop the mirrored building reflected the sunset over New York City. Richard Anderson, 45, observed the metropolis through the panoramic window while speaking on the phone. His tone, cold and calculating, contrasted with the orange beauty of the sky. "That's right, everything is planned. Don't worry," he said, ending the call as he noticed the door opening. Emily entered the room, her 6-month pregnant belly drawing a soft silhouette against the light. Her green eyes, once bright, now carried a shadow of concern. "Am I interrupting?" she asked hesitantly. Richard smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course not, just resolving some work details." Emily approached, feeling that familiar distance that had settled between them. She remembered how everything had begun 5 years ago. The casual meeting at the marine biology exhibition, the endless conversations, the marriage proposal under the starry sky of the Florida Keys. How had they reached this state of mutual estrangement? "I came to remind you about tomorrow's ultrasound. It's important that you be there," she said, caressing her belly. Richard nodded, but his thoughts seemed distant. "I'll be there, I promise," he answered, turning his attention to the documents on the table, a clear indication that the conversation was over. Back at the apartment, Emily watered her plants on the balcony. The collection of orchids and ferns was her small refuge, a constant reminder of her passion for life that she had studied as a biologist before interrupting her career to support Richard's business. Her cell phone rang, bringing her sister Lisa's animated voice. "How's my nephew or niece and you handling the night kicks?" Emily smiled, feeling the baby move as if responding to its aunt. "We're fine, physically at least." "And Richard? Any improvement?" Emily's silence was answer enough. "Oh, Em, you can't continue like this. His coldness isn't normal, especially with you expecting a child." "He's under pressure at work, Lisa. Things will improve when the baby is born, I'm sure." Even as she spoke these words, Emily felt the insecurity growing. In recent weeks, she had found strange calls on Richard's phone, hidden documents, and, worse, noticed how he avoided talking about the future with the baby. That night, during dinner, Richard surprised her with an unexpected proposal. "I was thinking, we need time together before the birth," he said, serving himself wine. "How about a trip, just the two of us, in touch with nature?" Emily almost dropped her fork, surprised by the initiative. "A trip? But what about the doctor?" he recommended. "That I not go too far." "I've checked everything," Richard interrupted with a calculated smile. "There's a wonderful retreat a few hours from here, an incredible prairie with wild horses. You've always wanted to see something like that, right? Your passion for biology. It would be perfect." Something in his tone left Emily uneasy. But the idea of reconnecting with Richard, of trying to save her silently crumbling marriage, spoke louder. "When would it be?" she asked, feeling a mixture of hope and apprehension. "This weekend. I've already organized everything at work to be totally available for you," he replied, extending his hand across the table to touch hers. That touch, after weeks of emotional distance, made Emily's heart race. Perhaps there was still a chance. Perhaps the man she had fallen in love with was still there, behind that mask of coldness. "All right," she finally agreed. "Let's try." Richard's eyes gleamed, but not with tenderness. It was a different gleam, one that Emily couldn't decipher. If she had realized what that gleam really meant, perhaps she would have made a different decision. But hope is always stronger than fear, and Emily chose to believe that this trip would be the new beginning they so needed. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The sound of Richard's SUV engine cut through the silence of the rural road. They had left New York 3 hours ago, and the urban landscape had already given way to extensive fields and farms. Emily observed through the window the clouds forming on the horizon, while gently caressing her belly. "Are you sure you checked the weather forecast?" she asked, noticing the darkening sky. "It looks like it's going to rain." Richard kept his eyes fixed on the road, his fingers slightly tightening on the wheel. "Don't worry. It will just be a few passing drops. The retreat has excellent accommodations. Something about that response sounded strange to Emily. Since when was Richard so interested in nature retreats? He who had always been an urban man, passionate about technology and comfort. "You didn't tell me exactly how you found this place," she commented, trying to probe for more information. "A work colleague recommended it," he responded quickly. "Said it's perfect for reconnection, exactly what we need." Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. In recent months, Richard had become a stranger. Small lies, evasive looks, secret calls. But she pushed these thoughts away. This trip was her last hope of saving the marriage, of creating a healthy environment for the baby she carried. When the GPS announced they should exit the main road, Richard turned onto a dirt road. The car bounced over the irregularities of the path and Emily held onto the side support. "Calm down, don't go so fast." "Remember, I'm not alone in here," she warned, protective. Richard slowed down, but his face remained tense, concentrated on something beyond the road. "Sorry, I'm anxious to get there." After another half hour, they stopped in front of a small, wooden cabin. Around it, an extensive prairie opened up with mountains in the background. The place was beautiful, wild and isolated, exactly as Richard had promised. However, there was no sign of other people or any structure that resembled a retreat. "Where are the other guests?" Emily questioned, confused. "This is an exclusive retreat," explained Richard, getting out of the car and grabbing the luggage. "I reserved it just for us, total privacy." Emily got out carefully, feeling the fresh prairie wind on her face. In the distance, she spotted silhouettes of wild horses, and her biologist's heart filled with admiration. For a moment, she forgot her concerns. "They are magnificent," she whispered, observing the animals. Richard approached from behind, placing his hands on her shoulders. "I knew you'd like it. Let's go in and rest a bit. Then we can explore more." The interior of the cabin was simple but cozy. A double bed, a small kitchen, a basic bathroom. Emily noticed there was no cell phone signal. "Looks like we're really isolated," she commented, trying to keep a light tone, though feeling a growing uneasiness. "Isn't it wonderful?" replied Richard, with enthusiasm that sounded rehearsed. "No distractions, just the two of us." While unpacking, Emily found some strange items in Richard's bag. A thick rope, a detailed map of the region, and a small case with medications she had never seen before. "What's all this for?" she asked, holding the rope. Richard took the item from her hands with forced gentleness. "Basic precautions. In isolated places like this, you never know when we'll need emergency equipment." Later, while preparing dinner together, Emily tried to recover the lost intimacy. She talked about the baby, about names she was considering, about the room they had started to decorate. "I was thinking of a forest theme for the room. What do you think?" she asked, hopeful. Richard cut the vegetables with methodical precision, avoiding her gaze. "Whatever you decide is fine with me." "Richard, are you really happy about this baby?" The question escaped before she could contain it. He stopped what he was doing, staring at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be?" "You seem so distant, as if you were just fulfilling an obligation." At that moment, something in his eyes changed. For a brief instant, Emily glimpsed a raw emotion, something between anger and fear, but it soon disappeared, replaced by a calculated smile. "I'm just worried about work, about our future. This baby—" He paused, carefully choosing his words. "This baby will change everything." That night, lying beside a sleeping Richard, Emily observed the wooden ceiling of the cabin, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. She thought about his strange answer, the tension that hung between them, the wild horses that ran free outside. Not knowing that this would be the last night of peace before her life changed forever. The dawn tinted the prairie with golden tones. Emily woke feeling the weight of Richard's arm over her, a protective gesture that, for a moment, made her remember the first days of their relationship. She turned to observe him, seeking in that sleeping face the man she had fallen in love with. Good morning, he whispered, opening his eyes as if feeling her gaze. Did you sleep well? Yes, Emily lied, hiding the hours she had remained awake, listening to the night sounds of the prairie and trying to decipher her husband's strange behavior. Richard got up quickly, as if energized by an internal anxiety. I prepared an itinerary for today. There's a part of the prairie where the wild horses usually gather. I thought we could walk there. Isn't it too far? Asked Emily, instinctively caressing her belly. Remember that I'm pregnant. I know exactly what I'm doing, he replied, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Trust me. That phrase, which before had calmed her, now awakened an inexplicable discomfort. Even so, Emily decided to move forward. After all, this trip was an attempt to rebuild lost trust. After a quick breakfast, they began the walk. Richard carried a backpack that seemed strangely full for a simple stroll. The sun was already high when they reached a clearing surrounded by sparse trees. In the distance, a group of wild horses grazed peacefully. It's perfect, murmured Emily, marveled by the bucolic scene. Richard placed the backpack on the ground and began to take items from it, a water bottle, binoculars, and, to Emily's surprise, the rope she had seen the night before. What's that for? She asked, feeling the tension grow. Precaution, he replied, avoiding her gaze. The slopes around here are steep. We need to ensure your safety. Emily looked around. They were on flat terrain with no nearby slope. I don't see the need for that here, Richard. He approached, holding her hand with studied gentleness. Emily, do you trust me? Those eyes, once a source of security, now awakened doubt. But Emily nodded slowly, still clinging to the hope that she was misinterpreting the signs. I need you to sit here, he indicated, pointing to the trunk of a robust tree. I'm going to tie a safety loop just to make sure you don't slip. Hesitantly, Emily obeyed. She felt the rope encircling her waist, then her arms, then her legs. When she realized what was really happening, it was too late. Richard, what are you doing? Her voice came out trembling between surprise and fear. Securing our future, he replied, tightening the last knot with calculated precision. Emily's world collapsed at that instant. It wasn't a safety knot, but a meticulously planned prison. You crazy? Untie me now. Richard took a step back, observing her with clinical coldness. I can't do that, Emily. You don't understand what's at stake. What's happening? Why are you doing this to me, to our son? He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture that contrasted with his controlled expression. This child would change everything, don't you see? The investors, the company, board, my public image, and everything would be affected. Emily stared at him, incredulous. What are you talking about? The DNA test, Emily, the test you asked the doctor for at the last appointment. Emily's heart raced. How did he know that? She had requested the exam in secret, after finding evidence that Richard might not be the biological father of the child, a suspicion that arose not from her infidelity, but from a medical condition of Richard's that he had always concealed. You searched through my exams. I needed to know what you were plotting, he replied, his voice now carrying contained anger. Did you think I wouldn't find out? That I'd accept raising another man's child? Tears streamed down Emily's face, not from fear, but from indignation. It's not what you're thinking. The doctor mentioned a genetic condition of yours that could... Save your lies, Richard interrupted. I'm not an idiot, Emily. I know exactly what you did. He picked up the backpack, adjusting it on his shoulders with mechanical movements. Richard, please don't do this. I'm pregnant. I need help. For the first time, he hesitated. A flash of uncertainty crossed his gaze, but soon dissipated. I'm going to get cell signal on the main road. When I return, we'll talk calmly about our agreement. Agreement, repeated Emily, astonished. Yes, you'll have two options. Sign the divorce, renouncing any right to my assets, or... He left the phrase hanging, a silence loaded with threat. Or what? Richard just smiled, a cold smile that Emily would never forget. Think of it as a negotiation, and remember, nobody knows we're here. I can simply leave. With these words, he walked away, leaving Emily tied to the tree, alone in the vastness of the prairie. The sound of his footsteps gradually diminished until it was replaced by the oppressive silence of the nature around. The wild horses, silent, witnesses to the betrayal, continued to graze peacefully in the distance, oblivious to the human drama unfolding. The sun was at its zenith when Emily finally stopped shouting for help. Her throat hurt, and the ropes that bound her to the tree had left red marks on her wrists. The hours passed with a cruel slowness, each minute amplifying the awareness of her vulnerability. She tried again to free herself, contorting against the knots meticulously tied by Richard. It was useless. He knew exactly what he was doing. Each loop, each turn of the rope had been calculated to keep her immobilized without seriously injuring her, a compassionate cruelty, typical of him. "Someone, please!" she shouted once more, knowing that no one would hear her in that isolated prairie. The baby moved in her womb as if responding to her despair. Emily breathed deeply, trying to calm herself. She needed to think clearly, for her and for the child. She analyzed the environment around her, looking for something that could help. The sparse trees, the tall grass swaying with the breeze, the birds flying in the distance, everything seemed indifferent to her situation. Suddenly, a movement at the edge of the forest caught her attention. Her heart accelerated. With hope. But she soon realized it wasn't Richard returning, nor some lost hiker. It was one of the wild horses, separated from the group, cautiously approaching. The animal was majestic, shiny brown coat in the sun, long black mane, deep, eyes that seemed to contain an ancestral wisdom. It moved with elegance, occasionally stopping to observe her. Emily held her breath. As a biologist, she knew that wild horses generally kept their distance from humans. This one, however, seemed curious, almost intrigued by her presence. "Hello," she whispered, surprised by her own voice. "Are you alone too?" The horse raised its ears at the sound of her voice but didn't retreat. On the contrary, it took a few hesitant steps in her direction. "I can't help you now," continued Emily, feeling strangely comforted by the animal's presence. "I'm a little indisposed." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. She was talking to a horse while her husband had abandoned her tied to a tree. The situation would be comic if it weren't tragic. The horse approached more, now just a few meters away. Its muzzle sniffed the air, as if trying to identify Emily's scent. "Careful," she warned, fearing to frighten it. "I don't want you to get hurt." To her surprise, the animal showed no fear. It approached even more until almost touching her with its muzzle. Emily remained motionless, hypnotized by that unexpected connection. It was then that something extraordinary happened. The horse began to delicately bite the rope that held her right arm, not with enough force to cut it, but with sufficient persistence to loosen the knots. "What are you doing?" murmured Emily, incredulous. The horse continued, patient and methodical, nibbling and pulling the rope. Emily observed, fascinated and confused. Was it possible that the animal was trying to help her, or was it just natural curiosity? As the sun began its descent on the horizon, Emily felt the knots loosen slightly, not enough to free her, but enough to give her hope. The horse worked with an almost human concentration, occasionally stopping to stare at her with those deep eyes. "Thank you," she said, feeling tears stream down her cheeks. "Whatever you're doing, thank you." A few miles away, on a small farm at the edge of the prairie, Jack Miller adjusted the saddle of his horse. At 40, this man of few words and much intuition knew the region like the palm of his hand. Raised. Among animals and nature, he had developed a special sensitivity to perceive when something was wrong in the prairie's balance. That afternoon, he had observed the unusual movement patterns of the wild horses. A large group had moved north, but one of them, the oldest in the herd, had headed in the opposite direction. This rarely happened. "What do you think he found, Storm?" he asked his own horse, stroking its mane. Storm whinnied softly, as if understanding his owner's concern. Jack adjusted his worn leather hat and mounted. Perhaps it was just curiosity, perhaps instinct, but something drove him to investigate. Years of living with nature had taught him never to ignore these silent calls. Let's take a look, partner. Back at the clearing, Emily fought against fatigue and dehydration. The day's heat had given way to a cool breeze that announced the night. The wild horse continued by her side, now lying on the grass near her, like a silent guardian. "I need to give you a name," murmured Emily, seeking in conversation a way to stay conscious. "How about Freedom?" The name came naturally, a sweet irony given her situation. The horse raised its head, as if approving the choice. Emily smiled, finding in that improbable connection a thread of hope to cling to. As the shadows lengthened, and the first crickets began their nocturnal symphony, Emily turned her thoughts to Richard. Had he really abandoned her there? Or would he return as promised to present his terrible agreement? The doubt was almost as painful as the ropes that bound her. How had she not noticed before the depth of that man's coldness? How could she have given her heart, her trust, her life to someone capable of such cruelty? While these questions echoed, in her mind a distant sound caught her attention. Hooves, beating rhythmically against the ground, approaching. Freedom, the wild horse, rose in a jump, alert. Emily held her breath, divided between fear and hope. Someone was coming. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The sound of hooves became more distinct with each second. Emily felt her heart accelerate. Was it Richard returning or some stranger? Any possibility seemed equally frightening in her vulnerable condition. Freedom, the wild horse, remained alert, ears raised, capturing every vibration. Surprisingly, it didn't flee with the approach of the sounds. On the contrary, it positioned itself between Emily and the direction from which the noise came, like an instinctive protector. A silhouette appeared on the horizon, outlined against the orange sky of dusk. A man on horseback, advancing at a constant rhythm. It wasn't Richard. Emily realized this immediately. The posture was different, more natural on the animal, as if man and horse were a single entity. "Help! I'm here!" she shouted, gathering the strength she had left. The rider adjusted his direction upon hearing the cry, accelerating his pace. When he finally reached the clearing, Emily could see him clearly. A middle-aged man, skin bronzed by the sun, attentive eyes under a worn leather hat. A typical cowboy of the region. "My God," he murmured, quickly dismounting upon seeing her. "Tied up. What happened here, ma'am?" Emily hesitated, how to explain her situation without sounding completely absurd. "My husband," she began, her voice trembling. "He left me here." The man approached cautiously, noticing the wild horse that remained near her. "Impressive," he commented, looking at Freedom. "This horse rarely approaches people. He's the leader of the eastern herd." "He's been keeping me company," responded Emily, feeling immense gratitude toward the animal. "I think he was trying to help with the ropes." The cowboy nodded, as if that made perfect sense to him. Without further words, he took a knife from his boot and began to cut the ropes that bound her. "My name is Jack Miller," he introduced himself while working. "I have a small ranch a few miles from here." "Emily Anderson," she responded, feeling relief course through her body as the ropes were removed. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Miller." "Jack, please," he gently corrected. "And no need to thank me. Any decent human being would do the same." When the last rope was cut, Emily tried to stand, but her numb legs gave way. Jack quickly supported her. "Easy. You've probably been in that position for hours. You need to give time for the circulation to return." Emily nodded, massaging her wrists marked by the ropes. It was then that she noticed Jack's concerned look at her belly. "You're pregnant," he stated, concern evident in his voice. "You need medical care." "I'm fine," Emily tried to reassure him, although she felt pain and exhaustion. "The baby is moving normally." Jack frowned, his naturally friendly expression hardening. "And your husband left you here, in this state?" he asked, his indignation barely contained. Emily hesitated again. It was difficult to admit the truth. Richard's calculated cruelty, the betrayal of the one who should protect her. "It's a complicated story," she finally replied. "He isn't well. He believes the baby isn't his. Jack nodded with no judgment in his gaze. You don't need to tell me everything now. The important thing is to get you out of here, get water, food, and rest. He looked around, assessing the situation. My ranch is the closest place with a telephone. We can call the police from there and get medical help for you. The word police made Emily shudder. The idea of exposing the whole situation, of transforming that personal tragedy into a police case, seemed frightening. But what alternative did she have? Yes, please, she agreed, trying to stay firm. Jack helped her walk to his horse, a beautiful chestnut named Storm. To the surprise of both, Freedom followed them, always staying close. I've never seen anything like this, commented Jack, intrigued. This horse must have sensed something special in you. Emily looked at the wild animal with gratitude. He kept me company when I needed it most. I don't know if I would have endured alone. Carefully, Jack helped her mount, positioning himself behind her to ensure her safety. Freedom accompanied them, maintaining a constant pace beside Storm. As they rode through the prairie, illuminated by the sunset, Emily felt a contradictory mixture of emotions: relief at having been found, fear of what Richard might do upon discovering, gratitude for the kindness of strangers, both human and animal. "Do you mind if I ask?" began Jack, hesitant. "How does a man abandon his pregnant wife tied up in an isolated prairie?" Emily breathed deeply. She needed to organize her thoughts, to understand herself what had happened. Richard has always been controlling, but in the last few months since I became pregnant, he changed completely. He discovered that I had asked the doctor for a DNA test and he thought you had cheated on him, completed Jack, understanding. "Yes, but it's not true," replied Emily, the words coming out hastily. "The doctor mentioned a rare genetic condition that Richard has that could affect the baby. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay." Jack nodded without pressing for more details. "Sometimes fear makes people act in ways we would never imagine," he commented, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who knows the extremes of human nature. The sky was beginning to be dotted with stars when they spotted the lights of Jack's small ranch, a simple but welcoming construction, with an adjacent corral and some animals grazing peacefully. "Welcome to Hope Ranch," he announced, dismounting and helping her down. "It's not much, but it's a safe place." Emily looked at the illuminated house, at the gentle cowboy who had saved her, at the wild horse that had inexplicably decided to protect her. Amid the chaos her life had become, she had found an improbable refuge. "Thank you," she murmured, tears finally overcoming her resistance. "For everything." Jack just smiled, a genuine smile that strongly contrasted with Richard's calculated coldness. And at that moment, Emily knew she had found more than a savior. She had found a path back to the humanity that her toxic marriage had almost robbed from her. The kitchen of Hope Ranch was a welcoming environment, with wooden walls and simple utensils hanging neatly. A wood stove emanated pleasant warmth, contrasting with the cool night that had settled outside. Emily was sitting at the rustic table, holding a mug of hot tea between her hands, while Jack finished a call on the only landline in the house. "Yes, Sheriff Parker." "Exactly that. A pregnant woman abandoned in the prairie, tied to a tree," he explained, the indignation visible on his normally serene face. "Yes, she's safe now. Here at my ranch." Emily observed the man who had saved her, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. The herbal tea prepared by Jack had restored part of her strength, but the emotional exhaustion persisted like an invisible weight. "Thank you, Sheriff." "We'll wait here," Jack concluded, hanging up the phone. He turned to Emily with a gentle but concerned expression. "They're sending a patrol car and an ambulance. They should arrive in about an hour. The rural roads aren't easy." "Thank you, Jack," replied Emily, her voice firmer now. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." He made a dismissive gesture, sitting down across from Shoichinaidi. "It was Freedom who found you first," he commented, referring to the wild horse that surprisingly remained in the vicinity of the ranch, as if standing guard. "I've never seen that horse get so close to humans." Emily looked out the window, where she could distinguish the animal's silhouette under the moonlight. "There's something special about him," she agreed, feeling an inexplicable connection with the horse. A comfortable silence settled between them until it was broken by the sound of Emily's cell phone ringing. Jack had found the device in the bag that Richard had left by the tree and brought it with him. Richard's name flashed on the screen. Emily felt her heart race. "You don't have to answer," said Jack, noticing her discomfort. "No," she replied, taking a deep breath. "I need to face this." With a trembling hand, she answered the call and put it on speakerphone. Richard's voice sounded cold and controlled, as always. "Emily, where are you?" "Safe, away from you," she replied, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. There was a tense pause on the other end of the line. "You managed to get loose, and it wasn't a question but a statement." "Impressive." "I had help," replied Emily, exchanging a meaningful look with Jack. "Help that you would never expect." "Emily, you don't understand." Richard's voice became persuasive, almost hypnotic. "Everything I did was for us, for our future. I can explain everything if you give me the chance." Jack made a motion to intervene, but Emily raised her hand, signaling that she could handle the situation. "Explain what, Richard? Why you tied your pregnant wife to a tree and abandoned her in the middle of nowhere?" "It was a test," he replied, without hesitation. "I needed to know how far you would go to protect your secrets." Emily closed her eyes, assimilating the manipulation in his words. "What secrets, Richard?" "The DNA test I asked the doctor for. You didn't even try to talk to me about it. You preferred to assume the worst." "I found the messages, Emily." His voice hardened. "On your old cell phone, I know everything about you and Michael." The name hit Emily like a physical blow. Michael, her college colleague, her first love, long before she met Richard. A relationship that had ended years ago, well before her marriage. "Michael, what are you talking about?" "Don't play innocent," Richard cut her off, his voice now showing anger. "The messages from 6 months ago, the secret meetings, and now this baby. It was as if all the pieces suddenly fit together. Emily remembered how her cell phone had mysteriously broken 6 months earlier, how Richard had insisted on buying a new one for her, discarding the old one, how he had begun to change precisely at that time. "You invaded my old cell phone," she realized, anger replacing fear, "and found messages from Michael inviting me for coffee to talk about his marriage to Claire. Coffee that I declined, Richard, because I knew you wouldn't feel comfortable." Jack discreetly stood up, giving her privacy, but staying close enough to intervene if necessary. "Then why did you ask for the DNA test?" Richard's voice sounded less confident now. "Because Dr. Thompson mentioned that you have a rare genetic condition, something you never told me about," she replied, tears now flowing freely. "I just wanted to ensure that our baby would be healthy. It was out of love, Richard, not guilt." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "I don't believe you," he finally said, but his voice trembled slightly. "I know," replied Emily, with a clarity that surprised even herself. "And I will never try to convince you again. Say it's over, Richard. You will come back to me." The implicit threat in his voice was clear. "Remember who has the power in this relationship, Emily. Who has the money, the contacts, the lawyers." Emily looked at Jack, who had returned to the kitchen and beyond him, to freedom's silhouette in the moonlight. She felt a new strength growing inside her. "You have power, Richard, but I have the truth, and the police are on their way." There was a moment of tense silence. "You wouldn't dare." His voice sounded incredulous. "The man I loved wouldn't have been capable of abandoning his pregnant wife in the wilderness," she replied with surprising calm. "But you did. People change, Richard. I've changed." The sound of the line being hung up echoed in the silent kitchen. Emily placed the phone on the table, feeling simultaneously exhausted and liberated. Jack approached, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You were very brave," he said, the respect evident in his voice. "I don't know what will happen now," admitted Emily, instinctively caressing her belly. "He's right about one thing. He has money, power, influence." "And you have the truth," Jack repeated her own words. "Besides, you have witnesses, physical evidence, and this scar." He delicately pointed to her wrists marked by the ropes. Emily nodded thoughtful. People think the greatest threat comes from strangers, but sometimes—" She didn't complete the sentence, but she didn't need to. Jack understood perfectly. Outside, freedom's neigh cut through the night, as if the wild horse, so free and untamable, was confirming a universal truth, that the greatest prison isn't always made of ropes, but of fears and lies that we allow others to use against us. And true freedom begins when we find the courage to break them. 3 months had passed since that fateful night at Hope Ranch. Summer had given way to fall, tinting the landscape with golden and reddish tones. Emily observed this transformation from the porch of the small house she had rented in the town near Jack's ranch, a cup of tea in her hands and her belly now quite prominent. "Thinking about life?" Lisa's soft voice interrupted her musings. Emily smiled, turning to her sister, who had left everything in New York to be by her side during this difficult time. "Thinking about how life changes quickly," she replied, indicating the place beside her on the porch bench. "4 months ago, I was the perfect wife of a successful businessman living in a penthouse in New York. Now you're a free woman, about to be a mother, living where you chose to live," completed Lisa, sitting beside her. "I'd say that's a considerable improvement." Emily laughed softly, grateful for her sister's ability to see the positive side. "Things with the lawyer are progressing," Lisa informed more seriously. Richard agreed to the terms of the divorce. "Surprising," commented Emily, raising an eyebrow. "He seemed so determined to fight. Apparently the prospect of a criminal process for attempted qualified harm changed his perspective," replied Lisa with an ironic smile. "Besides, the evidence was quite convincing." Emily nodded, remembering the painful but necessary process she had faced in the last few months. The formal complaint, the testimonies, the photographs of the injuries caused by the ropes, Jack's testimony. Even with all of Richard's resources and influence, the truth had prevailed. "And what about child support?" she asked, concerned about her child's financial future. "Guaranteed, as we requested," replied Lisa, who besides being her sister was also her lawyer. "And the agreement includes a clause that prevents him from trying to obtain custody. He can request supervised visits when the child is at least 2 years old, if he demonstrates that he's in psychological treatment." Emily breathed, relieved. Her greatest fear was that Richard would try to use the baby as an instrument of control and manipulation. "So it's really over," she stated, a mixture of relief and melancholy in her voice. "This part, yes," agreed Lisa, lovingly placing her hand over her sister's. "Now a new story begins." The sound of hooves approaching interrupted the conversation. The 2 women turned to see Jack arriving on horseback, followed by Freedom, the wild horse that, inexplicably, had decided to remain nearby even after all. "So those months." "Good morning, ladies," greeted Jack, dismounting with the natural elegance of someone who had spent his entire life on horses. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," replied Emily, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "We were just talking about new beginnings." Jack approached, his hat in his hand as a sign of respect. In the last few months, he had become a constant presence in Emily's life, first as a practical support, helping her find the house, establish herself in the region, understand local customs, then gradually as a friend, someone with whom she could share thoughts and dreams without fear of judgment. "I brought some fresh herbs from the ranch," he said, extending a small package. "My mother said they're great for pregnant women. Help to calm and sleep better." "Your mother is an angel," commented Emily, accepting the gift. "Please thank her for me." Lisa observed the interaction with a discreet smile. There was something in the way Jack looked at her sister, a deep respect mixed with admiration that reassured her. After everything Emily had been through with Richard, she deserved someone who genuinely valued her. "I need to get back to town," announced Lisa, standing up. "I have a video conference with the office in half an hour. Jack, could you stay a while? I don't like the idea of Emily alone, so close to her due date." "I'm not an invalid," protested Emily, although smiling. "I still have 2 weeks to go." "Of course," replied Jack, ignoring the protest. "I can help with the roof repairs you mentioned yesterday." Lisa said goodbye, leaving the 2 on the porch. A comfortable silence established itself. the kind of silence that only exists between people who feel genuinely at ease with each other. "How is Freedom today?" asked Emily, looking at the magnificent wild horse that grazed peacefully near the fence. "Restless," replied Jack, following her gaze, "but reluctant to move away. It's as if he's waiting for something." Emily smiled, caressing her belly. In the last few months she had developed a theory about the strange connection between the horse and herself. "Maybe he's waiting to meet the baby," she suggested, half-jokingly. Jack looked at her with a serious expression. "You know, my grandmother, who was Native American, believed that some animals are protective spirits sent to guide people in times of need," he commented, looking at Freedom. "She would say it wasn't a coincidence that this horse found you that day." "And what do you believe?" asked Emily, curious. Jack smiled, his eyes reflecting the wisdom acquired in a lifetime of communion with nature. "I believe there are things in this world that go beyond our rational understanding," he replied. "Connections that we cannot explain, but only accept with gratitude." Emily nodded, thoughtful. She felt the same. Her life had been turned upside down, completely transformed in a few months. She had lost things she believed were essential: the marriage, the luxurious life in New York, the false security of a toxic relationship. But she had gained much more: self-knowledge, true friends, the courage to start over. "Jack," she called, suddenly determined to express what she had been feeling for weeks. "I need to thank you, not just for saving me that day, but for everything you've done since, for showing me that there are still good people in this world." He inclined his head, visibly moved, but uncomfortable with the gratitude. "You would have done the same for anyone," continued Emily. "That's the point. Your kindness is natural, genuine. It's not calculated or self-interested." "Emily," he began, hesitant. "No, let me finish," she gently interrupted. "In these months, I've learned to trust again. Myself, mainly, but also people, you, and that is an invaluable gift." Jack approached, sitting beside her on the porch bench. Carefully, like someone afraid of startling a wild animal, he took her hand between his, hands calloused from hard work, but infinitely gentle. "You've taught me something too," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You've taught me about courage. Not the courage to face physical dangers, but the courage to start over, to trust again, to open your heart when it would be much easier to close it forever." From the garden, Freedom whinnied softly, as if approving the conversation. They both looked at the magnificent animal, now a constant presence in their lives, a living symbol of freedom and the connection between seemingly distant worlds. "What do you think the future holds for us?" asked Emily, feeling the baby move in her womb, as if also wanting to participate in that moment. Jack looked at the horizon, where the sky met the earth in a perfect line. "I don't know," he replied honestly, "but if you'll allow, I'd like to find out by your side." In that moment, under the autumn sky, with the promise of new life growing inside her, Emily felt a certainty she had never experienced before, the certainty of being exactly where she should be, with the people she should be with. Not out of obligation or appearances, but out of a genuine and free choice. And that, more than anything else, was the true meaning of starting over. The baby's cry echoed through the small house, breaking the silence of dawn. Emily opened her, eyes immediately alert, despite the fatigue that accompanied the first weeks of motherhood. Beside her, Lisa slept deeply on the sofa bed, exhausted after helping her with the newborn's care throughout the previous day. Emily rose carefully, to avoid waking her sister, and walked to the improvised crib in the corner of the room. Nathan, at 15 days old, waved his tiny fists in the air, his little face red with the effort of crying. "I'm here, my love," she whispered, taking him in her arms with the delicacy of someone carrying the world. "Mommy's here." The baby calmed almost instantly upon feeling her warmth, his little eyes, a deep blue that would probably darken with time, fixing on her face with that peculiar intensity of newborns. Emily felt her heart overflow with love. "Shall we go outside for a bit?" she murmured, wrapping him in a light blanket. "Dawn is coming, and it's the most beautiful time of day." With Nathan secure in her arms, Emily walked to the porch. The sky was beginning to lighten on the horizon, promising another sunny day. The gentle breeze carried the smell of wet earth and wildflowers. She sat in the rocking chair that Jack had made especially for her, a welcome gift for Nathan. "See those colors in the sky?" she whispered to the baby, who watched her attentively. "It's the world saying good morning to you, my son." A movement at the edge of the property caught her attention. Freedom, the wild horse that had saved her months ago, was cautiously approaching. Since Nathan's birth, the animal seemed even more present, always near the house like a silent guardian. "Look who's come to visit us," said Emily, gently turning the baby so he could see. "It's your protector, Nathan. He's the one who helped Mommy when she needed it most." The horse stopped a few meters from the porch, ears raised, observing mother and child with that expression of ancient wisdom that had always intrigued Emily. There was something almost human in its gaze, an understanding that went beyond what one would expect from an animal. "He seems to be waiting for something," commented a deep and gentle voice. Emily turned to see Jack climbing the porch steps, a basket covered with a checkered cloth in his hands. "Good morning," she smiled, genuinely. "Happy to see him. Do you always wake up with the birds?" "Habit of a lifetime on the ranch," he replied, placing the basket on the small table nearby. "Mum sent breakfast for you all. She said a first-time mother needs to eat well to have milk." Emily laughed softly, moved by the constant concern of Mrs. Miller, who had adopted her almost as a daughter since learning of her story. "Your mother is an angel. Tell her I'm very grateful." Jack approached to observe Nathan, who now slept peacefully in Emily's arms. "He's getting stronger every day," he commented, gently touching the baby's hand with a calloused finger. "And looking more like you." Emily smiled, noticing how Nathan's fingers instinctively closed around Jack's finger, a simple gesture but loaded with meaning for her. "Jack, she began, hesitant. "I've been thinking about what we discussed before the birth." His face lit up with a mixture of hope and caution. In the week before Nathan's birth, they had had an important conversation where Jack expressed his feelings for her. Emily, still processing everything that had happened with Richard, had asked for time to organize her thoughts and emotions. "You don't need to say anything now, Emily," he replied gently. "I know you have a lot on your mind." "No, I do need to," she insisted, her voice gaining firmness. "These months here, away from New York, away from everything I knew, have taught me a lot about myself." Jack sat in the chair beside her, respecting her space but present, as he had always been since the first day. "I've learned that life rarely follows the path we plan," continued Emily, looking at the sleeping baby, "and that sometimes it's in the detours, in the falls, that we find the true meaning of everything." From the garden, Freedom whinnied softly, as if agreeing with her words. "When Richard left me tied to that tree, I thought my life was over." Emily's voice trembled slightly as she remembered that moment. "I couldn't see beyond that prairie, that betrayal, that abandonment." Jack remained silent, respectful, just listening. But then something extraordinary happened. A smile illuminated Emily's face. A wild horse appeared, then a cowboy, and suddenly the end became a beginning. She turned to face him directly. "You asked if you could be by my side as we discover what the future holds for us. My answer is yes, Jack. Yes, I want to build something new, something true by your side." His eyes shone with contained emotion. "Are you sure, Emily? I don't want you to feel pressured or rushed." "I've never been so sure of anything in my life," she replied with conviction. "What I feel for you grew naturally day by day, like a seed planted in fertile soil. It's not a reaction to what I experienced with Richard, nor an escape from pain. It's something genuine, something mine, something ours." Jack extended his hand, gently touching her face. "You're the bravest woman I've ever met, Emily Anderson." "Emily Taylor," she corrected, smiling. "I went back to using my maiden name, a small symbol of my new beginning." Jack smiled, an uncontained tenderness in his gaze. "Emily Taylor," he repeated, as if savoring each syllable. "It suits you. Strong and beautiful, like its owner." A loud neigh came from the garden, almost like an equine laugh breaking the solemn moment. They both laughed, turning to see Freedom, who had now approached closer to the porch. "I think he approves," commented Emily, adjusting Nathan in her arms. Jack stood up, walking to the balustrade to better observe the horse. "You know, in the last few days I've noticed something," he said, thoughtful. "Freedom has been appearing with other horses from the herd. It's as if he's introducing them to you and Nathan." Emily raised her eyebrows, surprised. "Do you think he's about to return to nature? To his herd?" "Maybe," replied Jack, sitting back down beside her. "Maybe he feels his mission is accomplished." Emily felt a pang of sadness at the thought of no longer seeing the magnificent animal every day. Freedom had become part of her. New life, a living symbol of her journey. "I'll miss him," she admitted with a sigh. "He'll always be around," assured Jack. "Not everything we love needs to be constantly by our side to be part of our lives." Emily reflected on these words. She thought of Lisa, who would soon return to New York, but would continue to be a pillar in her life. She thought of her parents, who, despite the distance, had offered unconditional support when they learned of everything. She even thought of Richard, not with anger or hurt, but with a serene understanding that that relationship, although painful, had been part of her journey to this moment. "You're right," she agreed, looking at Nathan. "It's an important lesson to teach our son." Jack seemed surprised by her words. "Our son?" Emily smiled, realizing what she had spontaneously said. "If you want, yes. Nathan needs a father who loves him, who is an example of integrity and kindness, someone like you." Jack's eyes watered, an emotion rarely demonstrated by this habitually reserved man. "It would be the greatest honor of my life," he replied, with a choked voice. At that moment, Nathan awoke, opening his little eyes and yawning, as if sensing the importance of the moment. He didn't cry. He just observed the two faces that looked at him with love. "I think he agrees too," joked Emily, adjusting the blanket around the baby. Jack extended his arms. "May I?" Emily nodded, handing him the small bundle. She observed, with an overflowing heart, the gentle way those hands accustomed to hard work held her son, with an almost reverent care. "Hello, Nathan," said Jack to the baby, his normally deep voice softened by emotion. "I promise to always be here for you and your mother, to always protect you, to always love you. A simple promise, without grand gestures or elaborate words. A sincere promise, made by a man who valued truth above all." From the garden, freedom neighed once more, as if sealing that moment. Then, to the surprise of Emily and Jack, the magnificent horse turned and began to move away toward the prairie. At the edge, other wild horses awaited him, the herd he had led for years. "He's leaving," murmured Emily, a mixture of emotions in her voice. Jack nodded, understanding. "He's completed his mission. Now it's time to return to his world." They observed in silence as Freedom joined the other horses. Before disappearing into the vastness of the prairie, the animal turned one last time, as if in farewell. Its silhouette outlined against the rising sun was an image of pure and untamed beauty. "You know, don't you," said Emily, thoughtful, "we'll never really discover why he appeared that day, why he decided to help me." "Some things don't need to be explained to be true," replied Jack, with the simple wisdom of someone who had lived in harmony with nature. "Perhaps it's better this way, to maintain the mystery." Emily agreed. There was beauty in the inexplicable, in connections that transcended rational understanding, like the bond between a wild horse and a woman in danger, like the unexpected love that flourished between her and this gentle man, like the miracle of life that rested in his arms. As they watched the horses disappear on the horizon, Emily felt a peace she had never experienced before. It wasn't the false security of her former marriage, built on appearances and control. It was something deeper, more true, the certainty that, regardless of the challenges the future might bring, she would face them all with the strength she had discovered within herself on that prairie. "You know what I like most about you, Jack?" she asked, breaking the contemplative silence. "What?" he inquired, curious. "You never try to cage me. You never try to control me or diminish me. You give me space to be who I am." Jack smiled, returning Nathan to his mother's arms. You can't truly love without freedom, Emily. It would be like trying to hold water with closed hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more you lose. The sun now fully illuminated the horizon, bathing the porch in a golden light. A new day, a new beginning. Emily looked at her son, at Jack, at the prairie where the horses had disappeared. Freedom, she murmured, both the name of the horse and the concept it represented. The word now had a completely new meaning for her. In the kitchen, they heard Lisa moving about, probably preparing coffee. Soon the house would fill with life and movement. There would be decisions to make, plans to create, a whole life ahead. But, for now, in this moment suspended between past and future, Emily just existed, fully present, fully alive, free from the visible chains that had bound her to that tree, free from the invisible chains of a toxic relationship, free to love, to choose, to be. "Shall we go inside?" invited Jack, standing up and extending his hand to help her. Emily smiled, accepting his support to stand up with Nathan in her arms. Yes, let's go, the day is just beginning. And together, as a family formed not by obligation or convention, but by choice and genuine love, they entered the small house illuminated by the morning sun. Outside, the prairie extended vast and mysterious, guarding its secrets and promises. And somewhere within it, a horse named Freedom ran wild and free, as Emily now finally felt.